So I imagine somebody who's listening to this, who's saying like, yeah, I want that. That sounds amazing. That joy, that deep joy. But I live in such an impoverished area where I've seen my parents murdered, or I've been raped or abused, or something horrible's happened to me, or very frankly, just even you and I sitting here right now, to know that that's happening in the world right now. There's somebody
Yeah.
right now. There's a child being molested. There's somebody being raped. There's somebody being murdered. And how could I ever find that joy when those things are going on in the world? And I don't think it's mutually exclusive. That's why I'm really curious to hear your response on that. But I think for a lot of people, that's where they go. Like, how could you talk to me about joy when that's the world we live in?
Yeah. Well, man, that's a huge question. Let me start by, since you brought it up, talking about rape and sexual assault. So in America, 1 in 4 women will be either raped or sexually assaulted in their lifetime, and we're either, depending on who you ask, the first or second most wealthy, most developed, country in the world. So to me, that suggests pathology, meaning sickness, meaning something is deeply wrong. Um, and I think we end up creating these stories for ourselves that sort of leave us mired in our suffering. For instance, how many times have you heard a narrative to the effect of like, once a woman's been raped, she's marked for life, or she'll never be okay fully again. Well, when we tell ourselves stories like that, when we tell ourselves stories that, like, if I don't slow down and work 80 hours a week and continue to, get the promotions and buy more stuff, then, you know, these narratives situate us within the world. And I'm not saying that people are out there thinking, oh, well, this narrative, and I'm going to, but those are the things we say to ourselves. And so going back to the matter of sexual abuse, I think that the very fact that you can heal shows you that the suffering, the pain is not the most real thing in the world. I'm not diminishing anyone's suffering. I dealt a lot with victims of rape and sexual assault when I was working in hospitals. It's heartbreaking. But what's more heartbreaking is when you take somebody who's strong and vibrant and who's been hurt and tell them that that hurt is more real than all their strengths and all their joy. This is one thing too that I like about Buddhist notions, in that they tend to be a lot less binary than perhaps Christian notions. Like in Buddhism, you can feel joy and pain at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. If anything, they're often flip sides of the same coin. And as far as like, how can we justify joy in light of the suffering going on in the world? Well, I know this is kind of a small example, but it's one of my most intense experience of it. My son, from the time he could walk, had this gift where he would walk into a room and he would know who the person who was having the hardest time was, and he'd go straight to him. And he's got this cackle that's kind of like a joyous lawn chair unfolding, and you see him smile and laugh, and then you just watch what happens to the room. You watch the way in which his joy spreads. His joy helps people realize that they have joy in them. It's like, I can let these other things go for a moment. Because, I mean, let's be honest with you. Yeah, there are all these horrible things happening all over the world, but I don't see how being joyless and angry adds anything. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I don't think you're doing that at all.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is that the idea that we're somehow, scoring virtue points by not allowing ourselves to experience joy seems to me to actually cut against the desire to create a more verdant and just world.
I love what you're saying. Let's swim in this a little bit, because I think there's a lot to unpack and consider in that. So let's go on that last point. And I love that you're bringing it up, right? Like, those horrible things are happening in the world. So what good does it do us? I've had a lot of people come on this show, not a lot, but a good bit, that talk about optimism as their main value. I had somebody who lived in Cambodian concentration camps and was just, and we've read Viktor Frankl and we've heard Holocaust survivors, and a lot of them will say that type of thing of, what choice do I have but to be optimistic, right? I'm suffering already. At least in my mind, I could stay positive. And I think obviously there's a lot of value to that, and there's a lot of logic to that, and all those things. But to look at the other side of it for a second and just explore it. And this is the stuff that I think we, the rhetorical, we have to talk about and really be honest with and see where it goes. I think where I find myself landing sometimes on that is almost this obligation as a decent human, right? To say it would be an illusion. It would be a story I'm telling myself. Sometimes I think this for me to allow myself to go even today, right? We're going to finish this conversation at some point and I'm going to go maybe play with my son or go to the store or do whatever. How in good conscience can I do those things? Experience that joy when I know those things are happening. I get logically, it seems like the only choice because I might as well, but there seems something so selfish in that to say, well, I have the ability and the privilege or whatever to overlook, not overlook it, but to say, like, I'm still going to choose joy, where some people don't get that choice, maybe. And it would be wrong of me to not just acknowledge the honest truth of what the world is and how dark and ugly it can be. I'm not saying that's right. I know that's super cynical, but there's a part of me that believes maybe it's the right way to be. I don't know. What do you think?
Um, I mean, I think in a Judeo-Christian society that guilt has been elevated to like the ultimate virtue sometime. And I
Interesting.
don't say that to be dismissive, but I say that again, what is the basic story of Christianity? Well, it's that people were such shit that God had to send his own son, torture him, kill him, and then bring him back from the grave to make us worthy of love. And
That's what it takes.
I
Yeah.
know a great many wonderful Christians who are faithful, generous people. So I'm not taking a swipe at the religion as a whole. There's also a lot of different ways to talk about soteriology, which is just the theology of salvation. But again, you have these stories that we tell ourselves, and we come to believe, especially if you grew up in certain expressions of Christianity, Protestant ones, Catholic ones, doesn't really matter. We grow up thinking that suffering is kind of what we deserve, and that if we're not suffering, then we're not doing it right. Now, talking about the real thorny issue, which is you almost feel like you're turning your back on these people, right?
Right.
If you don't acknowledge their suffering. And again, I'm gonna get small here. Just the story for brief story from my life. I don't know if that's like philosophically justifiable, but just share from some of the things that I've seen. Um, I dealt with a lot of trauma patients when I was working in hospitals. A lot of people who'd had things done to them that you couldn't even imagine, and not once did I experience them being better or happier for my being, solemn.